observers online. So I would like to welcome everyone onto the session tonight. My name is Tom Lonergan. I'm the Education Officer volunteer for IPSC. Tonight's session is on the central bank, and we've got five sessions, 5 solidarity sessions over the next 5 Monday nights. So tonight, 5 consecutive Monday nights. So the 10th to 17th to 24th, and Monday the 1st of December. So we'll talk a little bit more about tonight, but just to draw your attention to the fact that we have a diverse 5 sessions. We got some feedback from people to say they wanted, the sessions to cover different areas. So we have a Palestinian, Iman Mohammed, next week. I'll talk about that a little bit more. A really interesting session. She's a photojournalist, in fact, the first female photojournalist in Gaza. We've Dr. John Reynolds, Associate Professor of Law in Maynooth University, coming on talking about international law on the following Monday. John is an expert on international law, and anyone who's heard John before would be super impressed with his knowledge. He supported the International Court of Justice and ICC cases. On the following Monday, we have Dr. Rebecca Helen, who is a clinical psychologist and activist, talking about solidarity as practice, psychology, power, and the struggle for Palestine. There's a summary on our website. That looks like a really interesting session. And the final one is more about activism, about priorities, about BDS, OTB, Occupied Territories Bill. Shannon, what are our priorities for IPSC? What should we be focusing on? And that we'll have Brian O'Hergitig, our media officer, talking about media, and also we'll have Zoe Lawler, our chair, on that session. So hopefully you will stay with us for the 5 sessions, and hopefully you'll enjoy it tonight. Just a couple of things. You will see, so you're seeing myself, Helen, and Sean, who are our presenters tonight, on screen. Sean is going to present first, and then Helen, and then we're going to have a Q&A. You will see 3 buttons on the bottom of your screen. So you will see a chat, a raise hand, and a Q&A. The only one that really works is the Q&A. So basically, if you want to ask a question, type your question in, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentations. So that's all from me for now, and hope I will hand over to Sean, who's going to share his screen, his slides.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I'm just going to talk about 3 phases. I'm going to talk about choosing BDS targets, about building the campaign, which included public pressure, protests, political and legal action, and direct action. And finally, I'm just going to talk briefly about the central bank on trial. And this was a case brought by TD Gary Gannon. So just on this strategy of choosing BDS targets, I think that there's 3 things. They should be winnable, they should be focused, and they should be tangible. They should be easy to be understood. And just a couple of short examples. Last year, Red Hat, which are a software subsidiary of IBM, they were due to hold a summit at Croke Park. And we got that cancelled, and that was a significant enough victory in itself. Red Hat have direct ties to the Israeli army. This summit was sponsored by the Hewlett-Packards, the Intels, and it was great to have that cancelled and that it wouldn't be in Croke Park. And then the next BDS target, it's an ongoing one, is Allianz sponsorship of the GA's. Second most important is the league, and there's an ongoing campaign to get Allianz to end, or get the GA to end the sponsorship of Allianz. And that brings me to the central bank. the Stop Funding Genocide campaign. And not only did we think it was winnable, that it was focused and easily understood, but that if we had a victory, it would be hugely significant, that we would have been able to stop the Israeli state from financing their genocide campaign, from being able to sell their bonds in the 27 countries in the EU. So let's just look at the timeline. So in September last year, we first learned about the Israeli bonds from the ditch. And we learned that Israeli bonds, which are used for state funding, that these were approved by the central bank in September. And they need to be approved annually. They're clearly marketed as war bonds, and so they're used to facilitate the financing of genocide. And just one small observation that's worth noting is that there was an arts group called the Interrupted Collective, and they were due to hold an exhibition shortly after the central bank had facilitated the approval of the prospectus, and they cancelled their exhibition. It was the exhibition was going to be financed by the central bank, and so they refused to actually take part. And I see now that their exhibition is now going to be 13 months later, is now going to be in the Access Centre in Ballymun. So what was the central bank's response? So in October last year, the governor appeared before the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and there were a number of questions put to him in relation to their approval of the Israeli bond prospectus. And the governor said he would go away and he would think about it. And a couple of months later in December, they wrote what's known as their definitive response, a 19-page report. And this is a response that's currently on their website, and it's one that they refer to every time people ask questions in relation to their support of the bonds. And one thing that's noticeable as well is that it was published a week after the Joint Oireachtas Committee itself was dissolved. And I think it shows the sort of contempt that the government, that the central bank have, not only for the public, but also for Dáil committees. Now, one of the significant things that was asked of the governor when he appeared before the Joint Oireachtas Committee was, had the ICJ January 2024, that landmark ruling about that there was plausible evidence that Israel was committing genocide. And they refused to answer that question. They answered it on another, the ICJ July ruling. And we made a Freedom of Information request, and we learned that 20 of the most senior people in the bank were involved in writing, reviewing, and approving their definitive response. And it shows that there was obviously a deliberate attempt not to address the question of genocide complicity. And it's something that we've seen right throughout this campaign. In June, we saw that the Deputy Governor, Elizabeth Mary McMahon, saying that the central bank are not a signature to the Genocide Convention. And we've seen that the governor stated that the Genocide Convention does not apply to the central bank. And I think that Helen will expand a lot more on this in her presentation. So the campaign involved public and media pressure. It involved building a broad-based campaign. There was also internal pressure within the bank from the Unite Union and worker support. And it also involved challenging the governor legally and publicly, and also the Banking Commission members. So I'm going to look at these in a little bit more detail. So on the public and media pressure, the first thing we did was to produce what I thought was an excellent A5 leaflet, which explained what the campaign and what the bonds were about. And it was aimed primarily at activists, solidarity activists, for people who turned up at our national march, and also aimed at the staff in the central bank itself. So at all those monthly national IPSC marches, we had huge visibility on the campaign. So we produced banners, which were at the front of the march, which were on the platform. We produced placards and that huge globe, the image of that image that is used by the central bank. And we always had a dedicated speaker up on the platform on those national marches. There was also two groups, Liars for Palestine and Academics for Palestine, which wrote open letters signed by numerous liars and academics calling for the central bank to end their approval of the Israeli bonds. In May, we occupied the central bank for a number of hours, and this was important because it gave us some media exposure, because up until then, we had very little media reports. So the occupation was a good opportunity for media report, and we were able to follow that up with letters to the mainstream media, and articles started appearing in the press about the central bank's facilitation of Israeli war bonds. So, building a broad-based campaign, we held monthly protests at the bank down at North Wall Quay. And these monthly protests, they coincided with the meetings of the Banking Commission. And the Banking Commission is effectively a board of directors, a 10-person board of directors for the central bank. At those protests, we had multiple organizations, trade unions, and faith group, religious leaders who all spoke at these monthly protests. So we had all the main political organizations, the Labour Party, Social Democrats, People Before Profit, Sinn Féin. We had organizations, cultural organizations like Cunra na Gaeilge, Financial Justice Ireland, COLOV. We had major trade unions, the ICTU, SIPTU, and the Dublin Council of Trade Unions. We also had musicians, actors, poets, and writers involved in those monthly protests. And the idea was to get as many people on board, to get a lot of solidarity groups, organizations, to build a broad-based campaign against the central bank's facilitation of genocide. Here's a photo of the huge globe with the Stop Funding Genocide. And you can see that that's up at the very front of the national marches. We have the banner, the Stop Financing Genocide banner, near the front of the march. And there would also be one up on the stage platform as well. So these are some of the actions we were involved with on local authorities and Dáil actions. So we got the support, the almost unanimous support of 15 local authorities. And just one observation on Cork City Council, where there were 2 councillors who opposed the motion and the motions were about asking the central bank to stop approving the war bonds. And the 2 councillors who opposed it, one was an independent and the other was Sean Martin, a brother of Micheál Martin's. We wrote a number of Dáil questions for TDs to ask of the Minister for Finance. We supported the Sinn Féin Israeli War Bonds Private Members Bill, which would have brought in national restrictions, which would have allowed the Minister for Finance to stop the facilitation, to direct the central bank to stop the facilitation of the Israeli war bonds. And one of the significant things about this particular bill was that it was written and supported by the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advice, which is an office that's available to all TDs and parties within the Dáil. We also wrote a Dáil emergency motion, which was supported by the combined opposition parties in the Dáil, and it was moved by Cian O'Callaghan, who was the then acting leader of the Social Democrats. In June, the Joint Oireachtas Committee met again, and we wrote a verbal and written submission to the Joint Oireachtas Committee in June. And in August, the Joint Oireachtas Committee produced a unanimous report, and one of the 15 of the recommendations they made was that the central bank should take into account human rights and international law. And again, I think that that's something that Helen will expand on more in her presentation. So, challenging the governor. So there were two things that we did. One was that the IPSC, we took legal proceedings against the governor, that he was complicit in genocide under the International Criminal Court Act of 2006. And that case is ongoing. The guards have already asked for statements from us, and that case will continue. We also had the legal case taken by TD Gary Gannon, which I'll expand on a little bit later. We also challenged the governor at a number of public events. So we looked out for any public events where the governor would be speaking. And one of the first ones we saw was at the IIEA offices, the Irish Institute of European Affairs, where we had a large picket outside of that event. The governor was also invited to address the Dublin Chamber of Commerce in the Westbury Hotel. And again, we had a protest both inside of the hotel and outside of the hotel as well. We wanted to let the governor know that it's not business as usual, and no matter where he would appear in public, that we would be there to protest against him. The other thing that we did was to engage with the union in the central bank, the workers and staff within the central bank itself. Now, there are over 3,000 staff members in the bank. So it was unlikely that we were going to get a lot of individuals coming out and speaking against the central bank's support for the war bonds. So our aim was to work within the union in the bank. So we did a number of leaflets of the staff going to work on a number of mornings. We held a webinar information meeting for the staff. We advertised this via leaflets that we gave out in the morning to the staff. And we also sent LinkedIn messaging to a huge number of central bank employees. Now, we know that this issue dominated a number of all staff meetings within the bank. So typically there would be all staff meetings every 2 months, every 6 weeks. And this issue was the most often questions that were asked of the central bank governors and deputy governors. We also learned in August that a union survey showed that 77% of staff were unhappy about the position of the central bank's facilitation of Israeli bonds. There was also, in the same month, a Unite statement which expressed revulsion of the fact that the central bank staff had to work on these Israeli war bonds. The other thing that we did was we looked at the banking commission members. Now, the central bank, they have a board, effectively a board of directors of 10 members. 6 of them are appointed by the Minister for Finance, and we targeted 2 of these. One was Sarah Keane, who was the CEO of Swim Ireland, and we organised a petition around the slogan that Irish sport should not be complicit in genocide. And we got a huge support from 25 different sporting organisations, and we got a lot of media coverage on that. We also targeted Shay Cody. Shay Cody has been a long time prominent trade union official, and we wanted that these 2 members of the commission, that they had the power to actually call for the end of the approval of the Israeli war bonds, and that these 2 members would be in no doubt that they should call for the end of the approval of the Israeli war bonds. The final thing I'm just going to look at is the legal case that was taken by Gary Gannon. And we believe he had a very, very strong case. We had seen the papers, the legal papers that Gary's solicitors had sent to the courts. We had seen some of the replies that from the central bank solicitors. And one of the key areas that the court case, the legal case, revolved around was investor risk, that there would be significant investor risk, and this is a key regulation issue. And so the central bank had to take into account investor risk, and that they hadn't taken this into account. Now, we know that the central bank took this court case very, they saw this as a very significant thing that they had to respond to. The central bank have got a huge internal legal department. They also have external solicitors acting for them, but they also brought on board Paul Gallagher, a barrister and former Attorney General, to add it to their legal team. We organised an information webinar about the legal case that Gary was bringing. 250 people attended that webinar. Now, we did have plans to amplify the legal case, but we're hoping now that as the bonds were transferred, outsourced to the Luxembourg regulator, that we're hoping that a Luxembourg legal team will take over the case, and that Gary's solicitors have agreed to hand over all their documentation on the court case. So that's my contribution. I'm going to hand over to Helen.
Hi, everybody. What I'm going to do is just focus on some of the key fundamentals of the issue, and then on the current situation. So, I mean, as you all know, Ireland has played an absolutely extraordinary, significant role in enabling the sale of Israel bonds in Europe. It's been the home country for Israel bonds since 2021 following Brexit, and Israel bonds cannot be sold in Europe without the aid and the help and the involvement of the central bank. And we all know between 2021 and and up to this year, that was through the direct approval of the bonds. This year, because this campaign, all of you people and people around the country who campaigned hard and long against these despicable bonds, forced the central bank to stop approving the bonds, but they duplicitously transferred them to Luxembourg. And that transfer without that transfer, Israel bonds would not now be being sold in Europe. So that single act of transfer is a deep act of complicity in genocide. The Central Bank of Ireland had the power to refuse to transfer the prospectus. Absolutely nothing compelled them to transfer the prospectus. According to their own guidelines, they have absolute and sole discretion in relation to the transfer of a prospectus. The European Marketing and Securities Agency, which is called ESMA, has confirmed that the CBI could absolutely have refused to transfer the prospectus, and equally the Commission for the Surveillance of the Financial Sector in Luxembourg, CSSF, could have refused to accept the transfer. Again, it didn't refuse, and the central bank did transfer. But it's always important, I think, when we're talking about Israel bonds, to remember what they actually do. We know they've been funding the genocide for the last 2 years in Gaza, but they also fund the occupation of the Palestinian territories. They fund the apartheid regime. They fund the prison system, the torture and murder of Palestinian prisoners within the prison system that we've all been hearing about in the last few weeks. The last few days, the evidence that has been on the bodies of the prisoners who've been returned to Gaza, and in the testimony of the prisoners, but also the appalling suffering and of the people whose bodies have already been returned, who died in the Israeli jails. And that's what Israel bonds fund. And they have funded the forced starvation of Palestinian people and the continued blockade of aid, because we have a partial lifting of the blockade, but by no means is aid flowing into Gaza. And the list goes on. So it's really important when there is talk of ceasefire to remember that these bonds actually fund multiple crimes against the Palestinian people. International law is important also to look at. The issue of genocide is obviously key. And from the moment the risk of genocide is known, states have an obligation to act to prevent genocide. And the issue of genocide was raised first in mid-October 2023, but it was definitively announced by the ICJ ruling of 2024. There was no room for any state to pretend that they did not have obligations under the Genocide Convention. And from the point of view of Israel bonds and the central bank, the important thing is that organs of the state are covered by the Genocide Convention. And this was made clear by the ICJ in the ruling in the case of Bosnia against Serbia back in 2007. So the Central Bank of Ireland, set up under the Central Bank Act of 1942, it is obliged to honour the obligations under international law. And similarly, the obligations that were not to support illegal situations or violations of peremptory norms, which was very clearly stipulated in the ICJ advisory ruling of 2024, apply both to the state and to the central bank as an organ of the state. The other issue that sort of has been there from the very beginning is the issue of the EU prospectus regulation of 2017. And this is not a charter for crime, no matter what the central bank claims. Article 88 of the preamble states clearly that the regulation is to be interpreted and to be applied in terms of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. The central bank governor has repeatedly spoken about completeness, comprehensibility and consistency as if they're the only issues. But there is, within the prospectus regulation, a presumption that the proceeds of the financial instruments are not for crimes. They're not to be for slavery, for drug trafficking, for genocide, or any other crimes. And in terms of those 3 C's, the completeness and so on, it's very clear that the 2024 prospectus, which was approved by the central bank almost 1 year into the genocide, was not complete. It did not refer to the ICJ ruling. The 2025 prospectus that was sent to Luxembourg does mention genocide, but there's a sentence from that prospectus that I want to read, and I think it's really important. So the prospectus says, on December 29th, 2023, South Africa instituted proceedings against Israel in the ICJ, and it goes on to mention the provisional measures issued by the ICJ. But it then goes on to say, and I quote, "The case is pending, and Israel maintains that it continues to act in full compliance with applicable law," end of quote. Now, that argument, "the case is pending," is obviously entirely spurious. I mean, obligations under the Genocide Convention are triggered once the knowledge of genocide, potential genocide, is known. But that exact argument has been repeated and repeated by Makhlouf, governor of the central bank. He recently said at the Joint Oireachtas Committee, and again I quote, "At the end of the day, no final decision has been made by any court on the existence of genocide," end of quote. And in relation to the other part of that quote from the prospectus document that I read out, that Israel maintains it continues to act in full compliance with applicable law, I doubt if there's anybody or any institution on the planet that could actually consider that a truthful statement. And if a prospectus is to be complete and comprehensible and consistent, it has to be at least truthful, and that clearly is not truthful. Sean has gone through well and in great detail the campaign that was waged against these bonds. So what I'm going to look at now is what did the central bank do? I mean, we forced them to stop approving the bonds. We forced Israel not to ask them to approve the bonds. But the central bank made the entirely dishonest, appalling decision to transfer the bonds to Luxembourg on the request of Israel. And this does one thing and one thing only. It provides continued access to Israel to sell its bonds within the EU. It provides continued complicity in genocide. The central bank chose to ignore the recommendations of the Joint Oireachtas Committee report on Israel bonds, to ignore all its legal obligations, and to ignore public opinion in this country. And I should say that in terms of the campaign that was waged against the Israel bonds, the Joint Oireachtas Committee played a very important role, and the report that was issued on the 5th of August, unanimously by the Joint Oireachtas Committee, was quite a clear roadmap to the ending of the sale of Israel bonds, or the approval of the sale of Israel bonds by the Central Bank of Ireland. And it contained a very strong recommendation that absolute full due diligence be done in terms of international law before any further approval. And it didn't say before any further approval by the Central Bank of Ireland. It said before any further approval. So that covers approval by an offshore organisation. So the central bank just acted in breach of the recommendations. At the recent Joint Oireachtas Committee on the 22nd of October, where the central bank was called in to answer in terms of the transfer, Deputy Cian O'Callaghan asked the clear question: did the central bank consider Ireland's obligations under the Genocide Convention when making the decision to approve the transfer? And again, Makhlouf answered, there was a bit of rambling at the beginning, but he then said, the Genocide Convention and the ICJ advisory opinion, etc., do not play a role in how the prospectus regulation needs to be implemented. And that's just a reiteration of the position that the central bank has repeatedly said, time and time again, despite the fact that the Oireachtas Committee report on the 5th of August said that that precise position of Makhlouf, that international law and the Genocide Convention specifically did not apply to the deliberations of the central bank in relation to a prospectus approval or indeed transfer, that position was ill-founded. Well, Makhlouf seems to think that he can just arrogantly restate that ill-founded view, or at least that's what he did at the recent meeting. The other aspect of that joint Oireachtas Committee meeting, which shows a recurring aspect of the approach by the central bank, is that false information was given to the committee. I don't know whether it was incompetence or deliberate, but it was false. One of the central bank spokespeople said, when a prospectus is transferred, the competent authority to whom it is transferred, in this case that would be Luxembourg's CSSF, becomes the home member state for that prospectus. Now, in fact, that's actually false. What the regulation says is that upon completion of the transfer of the approval, the competent authority to whom the prospectus has been transferred, in this case the Luxembourg institution, shall be deemed to be the competent authority of the home member state, which is Ireland, for the purpose of the regulation, which is an entirely different matter. I mean, it seems from reading the prospectus regulation that the Luxembourg institution, the CSSF, is now acting as a competent authority of Ireland for the purposes of this bonds. To look at the government, what have we had from the government in the past few months, or since August, or at any stage really, is just silence, dissimulation, and stonewalling of the issue. Just recently, I got the last 2 days, a letter from Pascal Donoghue answering a letter that we had sent on behalf of the campaign to on Taoiseach in August, and not one of the questions in our letter was answered at all. But to come to the positive side and what we can do and what is being done, the first thing to say that the comrades in Luxembourg, the campaign, the solidarity movement in Luxembourg, has been from the beginning of September when these bonds hit Luxembourg, they have been organising and campaigning. And they started with a demonstration outside the CSSF. They have had parliamentary questions. They have had motions to Parliament. They had a press conference that they invited participation from Ireland. Alice Mary Higgins was involved, and we were involved from the campaign here. They have organised a petition which they have jointly with the M25 that they are asking people all over Europe to sign, and they are looking for support and solidarity. I mean, they're obviously a small country and a small solidarity group, but they're doing tremendous work. There was recently an EU foreign ministers meeting in Luxembourg, and there was a demonstration organised outside that by the Gaza Flotilla Group, and the Stop the Bonds organisation in Luxembourg was involved in terms of education seminar with people or chat at the meeting. One noticeable difference between the CSSF in Luxembourg and the central bank here is that the CSSF has asked the Luxembourg government for guidance. Now, to date, the government has not given any useful guidance. It's still hiding behind the independence of the competent authority, but it shows at least a willingness to question the issue. And there are a number of TD members of Parliament in Luxembourg really strongly following up on this. So where are we now? Well, I think that we're in a situation where we're doing battle both in Luxembourg and Ireland on this issue. The Central Bank of Ireland is still the pivotal enabler of Israel bonds in Europe. There's no question about that. If they had refused to transfer the bonds, there would be no Israeli bonds sold in Europe. And they acted to facilitate the sale of the bonds. The lesson from last year is that we can have an impact. We forced them to stop approving the bonds in Ireland, but we have to do more. And so it means that all of the actions that we took to try to stop the bonds being sold, we have to redouble our efforts in the coming months, working really closely with our comrades in Luxembourg, because basically the Israel bonds are at the heart of Ireland's complicity in genocide. And it's really important in that web of complicity that we know is happening, dual use goods, the overflight of our airspace carrying wet munitions, Shannon, that we play our part in stopping this. I mean, Francesca Albanese's recent report on the Gaza genocide, a collective crime, named Ireland as one of the countries that are complicit. And it's really important that we work to end that complicity. Thank you. Okay.
So thank you very much for that, Helen. That was absolutely brilliant. Now, Tom's connection has dropped for a moment. Tom Lonergan, who's hosting the session. So I am, gonna move
I'm back in again, Brian.
Oh, brilliant. Fair play. Excellent.
Okay, so thank you to Sean and thank you to Helen. Sorry, my connection dropped there, so just back in again. So Brian, you've had a chance to look at a couple of questions there, and I think it would be appropriate maybe to ask some of those questions. I think the best people to answer those questions, I think, are Helen and Sean. So if you could read out those questions there, then
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, great.
So the question really, firstly, huge gratitude for all that you have done and continue to do. Your strategy is excellent. Folks, any further questions? We appreciate it very much, but any further questions, just go in with the question, okay? But we do appreciate it. Question, here we go. If Ireland had refused to transfer the prospectus to Luxembourg, would that mean that we, Ireland, would have continued their facilitation, or could we have completely shut down the facilitation and sale within the EU? It looks like the CBI have temporarily exported this problem in the hope of taking the heat off. Exactly. What happens next year? Will we be back to square one again? As I understand that Israel can only change home member state once. In fact, it can only decide home member state once. And that Ireland was chosen after the UK left the EU. Yes, exactly. How can the CBI stand over their statement that they have not signed up to the Genocide Convention? Surely that is not optional, but a legal requirement under international law. Obviously, we all share the outrage that is implied in the last part of that. But the thing is, if Ireland had refused to transfer the prospectus to Luxembourg, would it mean that we would have continued our facilitation, or could we have completely shut down their facilitation and sale within the EU? What happens next year? Will we be back to square one? As I understand that the Israeli state can only choose a home member state once.
Will I take that?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
yes, please.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. If the central bank had refused to transfer the prospectus, it would have shut it down. Absolutely shut it down. They could have gone nowhere with it. They could have maybe submitted and asked Ireland to approve, but Ireland could have refused. So they could have shut it down, and that's what they should have done. There's no question about that. And there's no question but that the transfer, the offshoring of the prospectus was to keep keep it going. You're right as well. It is gone to Luxembourg for 1 year. Ireland remains a home member state. Israel will have to ask Ireland to approve or ask Ireland to transfer next year. And that's why really we have to stay focused, because this really remains an Irish problem as well as a Luxembourg problem. But sorry, was there another one, Brian? Another part of that I may have forgotten.
Sorry, Brian, you're on mute.
Yes, indeed. The second part of it was really just about whether international law is an aspirational thing or whether it's a core thing. But we obviously agree that it should be a core thing, and it is by rights a core thing, but in fact they're treating it as though it was an aspirational thing.
But the important thing with that is that the government has a responsibility to ensure that organs of the state, of which the central bank is one, obey international law, and they're not doing that.
Okay, for sure. And next question then. Is there a further role for the Oireachtas Joint Committee given their examination to date, their report and unanimous recommendations which reflected the concerns and demands of civil society voices? Is there a further role for the Oireachtas Joint Committee?
Well, the Oireachtas Joint Committee met on the 22nd of October, so I presume they will be issuing a report following that. Because basically they have oversight of the central bank, and at the central bank refused to answer any questions. So I'm hopeful the Oireachtas Committee will be making a strong.
Absolutely. You seem to drop out there, Helen, at the end. Oh, sorry, you're muted again. That's okay. Another question. Shea Brennan TD responded. This is the first I've heard of this now either way, but interesting. Shea Brennan TD responded to email from Email Campaign in June challenging CB complicity, stating the opposition has proposed a law to address the issue of Israeli bonds. However, the legislation drafted is unworkable, illegal as it contravenes EU law, and will be completely ineffective. So could you comment, Helen, on the government's claims that the legislation drafted is unworkable, illegal as it contravenes EU law, and will be completely ineffective? I want to comment myself on the completely ineffective thing. The completely ineffective thing was Pascal Donoghue himself stood up and said, basically, there's no point in us doing anything about this because the Israeli state will just find someone else to do it, and they'll just find another accomplice anyway. He actually stood and said that in Dáil Éireann. But would you like to comment on that one, Helen?
Yeah, so that refers to the Sinn Féin private members bill. That I think that's what Shea Brennan is talking about. But that private members bill, as Sean said, was based on advice from the Dáil Office of Legal Advisors. So it's very arguable that it would not have been ineffective, that it could have been a useful measure. But the government also defeated the emergency motion that was put by all of the joint opposition, which called simply for the government to honour its obligations under international law. And the other thing, coming back to what Brian said, was the argument that the central bank and the government were putting for a long number of months was that if Ireland stopped facilitating these bonds, Israel would go somewhere else. They'd find another home member state. But in fact, that was just a lie. Israel never had that option. And surely the central bank, as the competent authority, knew it. It took us a while, not being experts in banking or EU documentation, to find it, but we found it. And it was in the ESMA document and in the prospectus regulation as well.
For sure. A resoundingly good point there. There's a lot of gaslighting, like the assertion from Shea Brennan TD that the central bank's role is merely procedural. Approving Israeli bond prospectus directly facilitates Israel's access to international capital that finances violence. The ICJ has ruled plausibly genocidal. I think we absolutely agree with that, but the question has kind of been covered. Helen, anything further to?
No, but I would just say Shay Brennan was one of the members of the Joint Oireachtas Committee, which unanimously agreed this report. And he was at the meeting on the 22nd of October, and he asked reasonable questions of McLoof. And it's really a sign that when you can get people into a room and listen to the arguments, the same way at the county councils it happened, that sometimes people realise just how nefarious this is, how absolutely appalling it is that the Central Bank of Ireland is making this country complicit in genocide and crimes against humanity.
Absolutely. Let's see another one now.
There's a question there from Kevin, I think. What legislation has replaced the Genocide Act 1973 Ireland? Has it been tested in practice? Do we know?
I think it's the 2007 Act, but I'm sorry, it's not at the tip of my mind, to be quite
But
honest.
wouldn't it be true to
It's
say
a Criminal Justice Act that subsumed the earlier 1973 Act. Sorry, I just don't know the date.
And would it be true to say that the 1973 Act or any subsequent acts, that the general principle still applies, that Ireland has signed up to the Genocide Convention and therefore should be, as you've outlined previously, should be like the Genocide Convention applies to Ireland and operations of the state or elements of the state, such as the central bank, yet that the governor of the central bank says seems to be lying or completely incorrect in saying that they do not apply. Of course they apply, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another question here from Kevin. As the CBI is still the authorization body for war bonds, is there another legal case possible against CBI?
Yes. I mean, yes, there is. I mean, there's definitely the basis for a judicial review of the transfer, because, I mean, that transfer is clearly has one aim for Israel and one aim for the central bank, or certainly one effect, and that is to ensure continued access to EU markets. So it's one single act of, signing for a transfer that means a whole year of funding for Israel. And they knew when they were sending these bonds to Luxembourg that Luxembourg was going to approve it. There's no question of that.
Absolutely.
Israel knew Luxembourg would approve, and the central bank knew they would approve.
For sure. Kevin also asks, can you give more detail on the status of the legal case against the governor?
So that's the criminal case against the governor. So the IPSC lodged a complaint with the Gardaí under the Rome Statute that the governor of the central bank and persons unknown in the central bank were complicit in genocide by approving the bonds. We recently had to put in a more detailed statement, and we've added to that not only in the initial approving of the bonds in 2024, but in the decision to transfer this year, which guarantees access to Europe for the coming year, despite international law and everything else, that the governor is complicit in genocide. So the Gardaí at this stage are investigating that claim.
Fair play. Another point here, just a side note that might be useful for the campaign. RTE have an expose tonight on the CBI's role in destroying the lives of 42,000 tracker mortgage holders. Is this a good time to put more pressure on while they are in the spotlight? Good point, I think. Mm-hmm. Next question. So that's an expose on tonight. Next question. Thank you so much for the information and hosting these sessions. Very welcome. The unworkable legislation claim. If the proposed bill is flawed, why has the government failed to table its own legally robust solution? refused to seek an EU-wide ban, as done for Russian assets. And the latter was one of the suggestions of was similar to at least one of the suggestions of the Joint Oireachtas Committee, wasn't it? So why has the government not tabled its own legally robust solution, and why hasn't it sought an EU-wide ban?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't catch all of that question, but it's absolutely right. I mean, what the government did with the emergency bill was they deleted everything, not just the what they were to do, but even the basic information of the numbers of Palestinians who were dead and maimed and everything else. So, I mean, the government has, on this issue, have taken no action. And I mean, the letter from Donoghue that I got today, or 2 days ago rather, just says, oh, the central bank wasn't selling Israel bonds. And I mean, nobody has ever accused the central bank of selling Israel bonds, but the government have taken a completely hands-off role on this. They've, in fact, worse than that, Pascal O'Donoghue has enabled and abetted the central bank to do what they're doing. I mean, they talk about independence of the central bank, but the central bank is independent in terms of monetary policy.
You're breaking up, Helen, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Helen, I'll tell you where you're at. The central bank is independent in terms of monetary policy.
It's not independent.
We've lost you again. I'm really sorry. Do you want to try again, Helen? Independent in terms of monetary policy.
Oh, sorry. So I was just saying they're independent in terms of monetary policy. That's in fact dictated by the European Central Bank. But they are an organ of the state. They were established by the Central Bank Act of 1942. They have obligations as an organ of the state. The Minister for Finance has obligations and responsibility. He has the ability to call in the central bank governor or the Central Bank Commission at any stage. And in well over a year, he has not done so. I mean, he's just created this smoke and mirrors to protect both himself, the central bank, and the funding of genocide, in my view.
Absolutely. And making...
But Sean might like to comment on these. Sorry,
Sean, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no, I think that Helen has covered that pretty well.
Absolutely.
You know,
I'd like to add as well that Pascal Donoghue, his tactic was making ad hominem attacks on Paul Murphy for Paul Murphy's. He was so outraged that the term complicity in genocide would be used, and that was a story in itself.
Yeah. There's a question there as to why. The question says, I agree with your points on CBI and Ireland's attempts to skirt around international law. Is the catalyst for their actions the fact that Ireland remains one of Israel's main trading partners? Do you think that's one of the main catalysts, Helen? Or are there other bigger factors?
I think we could speculate on why, but it's really important to just look at the outrageous facts of what it is about, and really like trying to figure out why is not necessarily useful. What we need to focus in on is how it's entirely wrong. And you know, I mean, Sean earlier mentioned the Interrupted Collective. They were the first group of workers, the first group of people in this country to take action, artists who were really dependent on having an exhibition in the central bank. And they withdrew their exhibition, and Stephen Doody, the representative of that group, said, quite simply, genocide is wrong. We can have no hand, act, or part in it, you know, or with the organization that supports it. And, you know, that is the simple fundamental issue with all of this. And now we know it's not just genocide, it's apartheid, it's the Occupied Territories Bill, you know, the Occupied Territories and so on. But, you know, the reason why the Occupied Territories Bill hasn't been passed is probably linked to why this government is still allowing the central bank to fund genocide. But I think our focus has to be really on trying to get it changed.
Yeah. There's a comment and there that very relevant, I think, to a lot of what's going on. Prior to this webinar, I had the impression that central bank was off the hook and the actions needed to be picked up by Luxembourg. The webinar has explained so much and explains a whole new chapter. But how to hold on to all those people who lent their support to the activism to date? Obviously, tonight is part of that effort and brilliant. It merits so much more media time, possibly a prime time investigates. That might be, given that that there's one on tonight on something else, and as someone said, keep the pressure on the central bank. We'll certainly investigate that, and we'll discuss that after. I mean, one of the key things which we'll discuss maybe just at the end will be, what are the key priorities now? What are the actions we needed to take? So, very good point. Thank you for that. Over to you, Brian.
Absolutely. That is the question, or as Bernadette put it, what does the IPSC do next?
Yeah.
Helen, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I mean, look, we had an amazing campaign, I think. I mean, we had so much involvement from right across the solidarity movement, from NGOs, from human rights organizations, from the trade unions, from the county councils and city councils, right? So there's a whole reservoir of support and people who understand this issue. So I think we just have to explain the new situation. We also have, the work is ongoing with the Joint Oireachtas Committee. There's very significant legal opinion. There is the possibility of another legal case being taken, but we really do, I suppose, really need to refocus and commit to keeping the pressure up. And it's basically, I mean, in August, we had a very focused campaign of, September 2, do not renew. But we're probably looking at a slightly more long-term campaign, but with all the same elements. And, people really do understand the issue now. So I think we just keep going, keep organising. I saw earlier there was a question about, is it worth writing letters? And absolutely it is worth writing letters. Write to TDs, write to ministers, but write to your local papers as well. It's really important to keep talking about the issue. We need to, we will do another model motion for councils, another model motions to go to the trade unions, to go to all the conferences in the new year. We just need to keep talking about this issue, because the Central Bank of Ireland has been such a dishonest, duplicitous foe. It really has, supported and aided by a government that, while it says some useful things occasionally, is actually deeply complicit and isn't tackling any of the key areas of complicity.
Absolutely. And most definitely, writing to TDs is one of the best ways to bring the pressure. We don't say that often enough. Rachel,
just to say as well, sorry, Brian, and there's a comment there that says one of the responses received from contacting the Department of Finance was that the government doesn't nor shouldn't have involvement in external bodies and how they're governed, as in they're independent, that the central bank is independent, and therefore the government or the Department of Finance should have no oversight, which we absolutely disagree with. The central bank obviously has responsibility, but the government has overriding responsibility in terms of upholding international law, and they've washed their hands completely of that. There's been anyone who's been following this closely has seen that there's been a very strong campaign legally, both apart from the IPSC campaign, which Helen and Sean have led. There's been a very strong campaign in the Dáil. There's been a legal campaign, a number of legal actions, and we will continue those legal actions. And also, just to emphasize, Helen and Sean have both been to Luxembourg, have briefed the parties in Luxembourg to enable their campaign so we can jointly act together.
Absolutely. A few more questions here. One is a suggestion from Bernadette. Could you do a template letter for us to submit to our local TDs?
Yeah, we can look at that. Sean, you wanted to come in there?
Just on that final question about the independence of the government and the central bank. So one of the things that I touched on is that there are 10 members of the Banking Commission, and 6 of those members are actually appointed by the Minister for Finance. And the Banking Commission, what we learned, because one of the first speakers that we actually had at a protest was Des Geraghty, a former president of SIP2 and a former MEP, but also more significantly, he was also a member of the Banking Commission from 2006. And he stated very clearly that the Banking Commission did have the power to stop the approval of the Israeli war bonds. And that was one of the reasons why we focused on the Banking Commission members, but in particular, Sarah Keane and Shay Cody, who effectively replaced Des Geraghty on the Banking Commission.
There's a question here about Gary Gannon's legal case. Did we deal with that in detail already? Gary Gannon's legal case.
Do you want to take that, Helen?
Well, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, at the moment, my understanding is that Gary's solicitors, they were approached by some of the solidarity activists in Luxembourg about Luxembourg actually bringing the same court case in Luxembourg, and that Gary Gannon's legal team were more than willing to give all of the documentation that they had on the case. Now, I think I mentioned it in my presentation that Gary has a very strong legal case against the central bank. And I certainly think that it may well have been one of the factors why the bank did transfer or outsourced the approval to Luxembourg.
There's a question here from Rachel. In terms of steps going forward, could you speak more about joint action we in Ireland can take along with our friends in Luxembourg, or actions that we can take ourselves? So what Sean said there was an example. Is there anything else?
I think we'll probably be looking at, say, a joint day where we have protests, but we have no date for that yet. But the group in Luxembourg are right now in the process of contacting organisations, trade unions, other organisations in Luxembourg to build our campaign. They do have an online petition. It's with DM25, and it will be up on IPSC socials. So we would ask you to please support that, sign that, other people to sign it. They're asking for people right around Europe to sign it, to bring pressure on their government. And they're very conscious of being a small organisation in a small country, but in fact, they have been absolutely fantastic in terms of getting into action on this issue already. So yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right to be looking at what can we do together. It's so important. And to date, it's kind of been discussion and kind of sharing of information, sharing of templates, motions and things like that. We did have one press conference, but you know, really we're in the early stages. Another idea actually is to have a webinar for both countries where we'd focus on the legal issues. So some of those things are in the mix, but you know, it's really, I suppose, still quite early stages, even though quite a lot has been achieved by the Luxembourg comrades.
There's a question here. Should we contact MEPs from Luxembourg? I would frankly say not, because they don't have any duty of representation towards us. But I'll let Helen comment on that, perhaps.
I think contacting MEPs from Ireland will be probably the work that we most effectively can do to support the Luxembourg people. But the thing is, look, this could be ended by EU action, by EU sanctions. So it is part of that broad campaign for sanctions. It could be ended by the Commission in Luxembourg withdrawing approval. It could be ended by our central bank here, or by the government in either countries. So in a sense, we have a lot of targets, and we keep the pressure on them all.
Absolutely. A point here that UN there's the UN days and days of this, weeks of that, and the observances, basically. This date is coming up. It could be a hook. The Genocide Prevention Day, the UN Genocide Prevention Day. Maybe someone will have time to do a Google search and see that. And they are, by the way, they are very good hooks for things. There's UN, obviously, solidarity with the Palestinian people, 29th of November. There's a lot of different days, and a lot of them protecting journalists from attack and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that date is December 9th for anyone who wants to follow that date.
Please do check them out. And yeah, we should do that. Do
An
something.
interesting idea. Yeah.
A question here. What is the renewal date for transfer to Luxembourg?
So the renewal date was actually the 2nd of September, but they transferred them, and Luxembourg renewed on the 1st of September, bizarrely. But yeah, so
the next renewal date will be the 1st of September next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could be withdrawn. Approval could be withdrawn tomorrow by Luxembourg, just as it could have been withdrawn by the CBI over the course of the last year. I mean, when we started the campaign, we really thought we would end these bonds very quickly.
Yeah.
We didn't.
There's a point there from Dermot. Ireland takes over the EU presidency in July. Room for protest. But could Ireland be pressurised to have this raised in their term? Right.
Interesting.
That's a good point, and we'll certainly keep that in mind. Any other suggestions? If people have suggestions, obviously anyone who has been on the call or anybody else have suggestions, who should they send those suggestions to, Helen? Is there an email address? Would it be info@IPSC, or is there a specific email address for the CBI campaign?
We haven't a specific campaign address, so they can send them info.
Yeah, or you can, because we've hosted this on our education platform, you can please, if you any questions you want to send in to education@ipsc.ie, I will forward them on to Helen and Sean.
Thanks, Tom. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, we've gone 13 minutes over time, and you know the reason for that is obviously people are passionate about this campaign. It's been an amazing campaign. I mean, obviously there has been success along the way. There has been great collaboration along the way across party, across different groups, not just the IPSC, but like a whole coalition of parties involved, and we want that to continue. We're not going away. We're going to keep the pressure on, etc. So I thank everyone for joining. I just want to emphasize, so if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to bring it to a close for tonight. If you've got any more inputs, please send them to education@ipsc.ie. And you know, this campaign is active, is not going away, and is going to be intensified. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we have 4 more sessions coming up, and next week we have Iman Mohammed. Iman Mohammed is an award-winning Palestinian journalist from Gaza and a senior TED fellow. She is the first female photojournalist in Gaza, and she spent over a decade documenting life under the occupation, focusing on human rights issues and telling overlooked stories. In 2024, last year, she contributed to the investigation revealing Gaza had the world's largest cohort of pediatric amputees, an investigation later confirmed by the UN and cited as evidence of war crimes. Her work has been published internationally by major outlets such as New York Times, The Guardian, Washington Post, and CNN. So we're really looking forward to having a session with Iman next week. So please pass on the word. Please, now that you're registered, just to say, the fact that you've registered for this session means you're registered. You don't need to re-register for any of the other sessions. You're already registered. So you will get the reminders a day before and an hour before the session, because we're all very busy people and we tend to forget these things. So thank you again. And thank you to Helen. Thank you to Sean. Thank you to Brian. And thank you to everyone who attended. So we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Tom. Thank you.
All the best now.